Hi guys, I'm Lexi and this is
Danny.
and we are so excited to be back with season 5 of Girl Preach. Um I kind of wing the intros and I make them awkward. But that's Girl Preach for
I
you.
don't think I don't think they're worse than when I do it, honestly. Like it's so bad.
I wasn't going to introduce myself right off the bat, and then I did. So yeah, this is the new season of Girl Preach. We are back in full swing, hot mess mode,
Yes,
and we're excited to be here.
we are. We're so excited. Welcome back to another season of awkward intros and good conversations.
Hmm.
Love it. But
Yep.
yeah.
And if this is your first season here, Danny and I decided to start this podcast just to kind of talk about things that we notice going on in the world, just to be a part of conversations happening out there, and to give our perspectives. And hopefully, our perspectives are grounded biblically. If not, we want you to join the conversation and just tell us what you think and your ideas.
Yeah, because I mean, we do research and like we put a little bit of time into our topics before we bring them to you guys. But also like this is just Lexi and I's conversations. So
Mm-hmm.
like some things we've like looked up and looked into and some things we're just like, what about this? Like we kind of wing it too. So not everything we say is always going to be like on track, but that's part of it. Like that's part of sharpening each other and being in conversations about the word too. So, yeah, if we
Yeah.
mess up, don't hold us over the flame too badly.
Tell us,
We are
but don't
humans.
crucify us.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think the whole goal is growth. If you're not
Right.
growing in your spiritual walk, then are you spiritually walking?
Right.
And we hope that we are growing through each season. We hope you guys can see growth through each season. We're trying to do our best. We're imperfect people, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for today. I'm really nervous. So if I'm like stumbling over words, you guys be gentle with us.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I'm nervous. Like this, I think this is season 5 or something. So I mean, we should kind of be used to it by now, but like taking a break, like it's kind of hard to get back into the groove of things. And yeah, but I'm excited about this topic. Do you want to introduce the topic or do you want me to?
Yeah. I can
Okay.
introduce it.
Okay.
Um, So, Danny and I don't think have ever been like super quiet on how we see the church in today's settings.
Right.
And we talk about it all the time, the different functions in church and just different things. So, this topic has been covered by us before, but I think that we decided to go more in depth and more structured this time than we have in the past, just bringing it up. But we're going to talk about church functionality, talk about like the different classes within church, and just kind of like the whole culture, I guess, of today's America's church.
Right. I think for me, like this whole topic, like it's honestly been a topic like in like my real life, like within the last like probably 6 months. I've just really been interested in what our church looks like compared to like what the New Testament church would have looked like. And I'm talking like service, like the way that it functions, the way that we have different roles, all of the things. Like I've just really been interested in that because I don't think it's any secret how we feel about things, but like, the American church is struggling in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I'm just like, why is that? And I think that there's so many factors, but in reading and stuff, and preparing for today, I think I see maybe a couple more factors that play a bigger part in that. So that's what
Mm-hmm.
like I was excited about, and that's really where I've mainly focused my studies was between the elders and the deacons and the members and what their roles are and how that's supposed to look, like the what is the word I'm looking for, like the order of things, the hierarchy of things, I guess, maybe if that's I don't know if that's the correct term to put there, but that's kind of like where I focused everything. And I just wanted to see like how it was done in the New Testament time, and also in like the early church. And Lexi got me a Bible, a book, not a Bible, a book of collections of early church fathers' writings. And so that was really cool to go and like read some of that and look at that and the Bible and then like our American church today. So that's kind of where like I'm coming from today. But yeah, let's get into it. um, I don't really know like really where like to start other than I'm not really good at starting these. Lexi normally does. So I'm like I just feel like jumping into it. Sorry, I'm a little awkward getting back into the swing of things. But um just my header on my notes is Christ is the head. You know, Christ is the pinnacle. Christ is like the top. Every church has to be centered around Christ, and Christ, you know, God, the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, they have to be the ones leading the church. You know, like it's the head. And then under that you have there's so many different terms. Elders, teachers, preachers, overseers, like there's different terms that is coined, but for this today, like I'm just going to use the word like overseers slash elders. And then, you know, you have your deacons and your members or saints, whatever you want to call them. So anyway, I'm just going to jump right in. And this is just like my hot takeaway. I think that pastors and churches, I think that there biblically is grounds to say that there needs to be more than just one. I think it should be overseers, elders. I see Lexi shaking her head and smiling, so I think we're both on the same track.
We are. Yeah, that's exactly what I put in my notes is I think that having one pastor at the church is kind of where we're messing up in
Yes.
more ways than just one.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the more pastors that you have, the more people that are coming together like through their own study of scripture. So you're less likely to get led astray
Mm-hmm.
by a crazy pastor who's
Right.
not biblically grounded.
Right.
And then also, you know, the burnout that comes from being a pastor of a church is really big. And even if the deacons and everybody were like stepping up to help the way that like they should through the Bible, because they're the ones that are supposed to make the church run properly. um I still think that it's too much on just one pastor to pastor a
Right.
church. And so I agree, that's what I put in my notes, was that I think that we should have more than one pastor leading a
Yes.
church.
So in my study, like I went back to a lot of like the original like wording used in like different verses, like when specifically Paul, is like talking about overseers, and it's used as plural from what I have found. And I had Chris kind of help me with that too because I'm not really good at like that part of like language stuff. I'm like, these are plural. And he's like, yes, like it's, you know, that's uses plural. So I will say in most churches, there is not one example of a single pastor church in the New Testament. And that blew my mind because I'm like, as I'm reading it, you know, I'm thinking, as I'm reading Timothy, I'm like, oh, he's the pastor of that church, you know? But like even in Timothy, there were multiple within those churches, and like that blew my mind. And so I was like, dang. So as I started to read, I'm like, so where did we go from multiple overseers and elders to singular? Like what? Like when did this shift start to happen? And so in my study, and this is where the book that you got me for Christmas comes into play, and it was so handy to
I'm
read
so
that.
excited to hear because I haven't read it.
Right?
So
I
I'm
haven't read
excited to
it.
get knowledge from it.
I haven't read it completely all the way through, but like I started reading it, and then in some of like my googling and research, it was bringing up Saint Ignatius. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly. Ignatius, and there was like those books were in the book that you got me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go read these. So I skipped a few chapters, but you know I'll go back.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting. So with him, he starts to indicate a shift to one primary, it would have been like a bishop that overseen different churches. It says except for in Rome, so I'm not sure what that means, like if there was multiple still in the Roman churches at that time, but this would have been about 150 to 200 AD. It was standard to have a singular pastor. So I'm like, that happened quickly, like where you have overseers to a singular pastor. So so to me, my thought is New Testament time to 150 200 AD, you start seeing it singular, and then it's becoming the Roman Catholic Church at this point is like what you're starting to get into. My question is, when the Reformation happened, we kept kind of the structure of the Catholic Church, but changed the theology within it by keeping the single pastor setup, I guess. And so I don't know. I just kind of thought that was like interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, that is. I was thinking that the whole one pastor came along because of like access.
Yeah,
We in
possibly.
the New Testament, the churches were in like houses, like family
Mm-hmm.
houses, and it was almost like just that community or like your neighbors around you would come to like your
Right.
church. But then like as transportation became more
Mm-hmm.
available or things just started to happen, like I thought it in my thinking, I was like, oh, it must have been easier to have like more churches, because I think
Right.
I'm looking at it from a today's perspective where you can drive
Yeah.
down the road and you have so many choices of churches to go to. So then like a pastor being like, I don't like how this church is going, I'm going to go start my own, like I just assumed it became easier to do than like the little house churches that they were going to.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And yeah, like, I think also like the transportation, like what you said, like that's easier, but you also start to see the shift probably from house churches to like buildings. You know what I mean? Like outside places of worship, which I don't think there's necessarily inherently anything wrong with that. I'm just like looking at like the shift of like where we went from multiple pastors, house churches, small community gatherings here, like at someone's home, to buildings that like you rent, buy, build, whatever, singular pastors, like why the shift? And so I don't know, like but Saint Ignatius, like that book that you got me is kind of a Catholic, like point of view, which I love. I love getting that point of view on things and like hearing what they had to say. But to me, I was just like, huh, so we kind of kept the bones and changed the theology. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
what I don't know. So I think that like transportation and convenience, like you said, definitely probably played a part in it for sure. But
Hmm.
I don't know, like you said, like burnout is so real. But I also was thinking about like all the other pros that would come from having multiple pastors. And I think that it would probably prevent a lot of church hurt. I think it would prevent a lot of church splits. I think it would prevent a lot of maybe quarreling, because you would have, like, say you have five overseers or four overseers in a church the size of, the church that our home church, say you had four or five. Well, this one, reads, this verse and takes it this way, and this one reads the verse and is like, well, maybe it's saying this. You're not going to have one person up there saying, like, this is what it says. There's no room. This is our doctrine. This is, whatever. And then, half your church leaves. You know what I mean? Or a quarter of your
Yeah.
church leaves because you have another person up there saying, well, also it could be like viewed like this, or it could be taken this way as well, So there's just so many pros I can see to having multiple leaders in that area. And I think like the theology and like the church splits, I think that would help a lot in that area.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I dropped my pen. um, that's my little fidget so that I can just,
Oh.
But I also think that with multiple pastors coming through, they're getting a discipleship with each other. You know, like
Yes.
they're sharpening each other, they're going through the spiritual walk, they're shepherding this church together. And so I think that as long as they're doing it the right way and they're not going down a path of like control and power for this one group,
Right.
I think that you could see a good amount of discipleship coming through. And the
Yes.
pastor, they're not going to feel so alone and like the whole church is on their back, you know?
Right.
So I think that that would be like a really good. But I mean, I say this, and there's a decline in pastors in America today. Like nobody wants to be a pastor anymore. So like, how do you remedy this? Like, let's say that somebody was listening to our podcast and they were like, you know what? I think that would be a great way to go about doing a church. Like, how would they come about finding pastors for their church?
So I don't know about finding pastors because we are some of those pastors that have stepped away. But so I don't know about that. I I don't know. I think my like if it's a pre-existing church, I think evaluate your deacons. I think evaluate where your deacons are because the way that our churches are right now, you have your pastor and then you have like a board of deacons, and these deacons are men who are staples within that church and have probably or should be, meeting all the qualifications biblically and should be, holding themselves above reproach. You know what I mean? Like these should be these are like the men that are kind of so I mean, maybe start evaluating your deacons. Who can you just promote to elder? No, I don't know. But like I'm just thinking of our deacons at our church, and I mean, one of them is my uncle, and then the other ones I have known my whole life, and I could see any and all of them, stepping up to be that and to pastor alongside our pastor because they're really great men, like, and I could see them teaching and but I think that that's what holds people back is also the way that we have one singular pastor up on Sundays doing a whole sermon. When you look at the New Testament, that's not how it was. That's not how a church service was laid out. It's not anything like what our churches are right now. And so I think that that's also intimidating to people is the pulpit and the stage and the lights and all of the because that's not what it was meant to be. Our small group settings, our Sunday school, lessons, our you know children's church time or our Wednesday night time, like that's models more of what a New Testament service would have looked like. Is those small groups where I took notes over what a New Testament church would have looked like because I was curious. Um, it would have been in a private home. They would have probably sat in their dining areas. Um, it would in the earliest days it would have been they met together daily, and then it transitioned to Sunday mornings or whatever mornings one morning out of the week. Um, they would have taken part of the Lord's Supper weekly, and combined it with a meal. They would have had scripture teaching, where Old Testament scripture and letters from apostles were read by multiple people, not just one. So that's kind of where I'm coming at with like it's not just like one person teaching. Um, they would have had spontaneous and shared prayers, and the participation would have been by everyone, bringing a song, a teaching, a revelation, or a tongue. And also, kids were a part of it. And you see that in Ephesians and Colossians when Paul is addressing children in his letters, because this would have been read out loud at their weekly meetings. And so he's addressing the kids. So that's something that I kind of like looked at scripture with a new point of view because in Ephesians and Colossians where Paul's like, and kids, be obedient to your parents. I kind of always thought, well, he wrote that to the singular pastor of that church, and then that pastor got up and read it from the pulpit on Sunday morning, and that's how, to like the parents, and then the parents were like, Paul said you need to obey your parents. Like that's kind of how I always pictured it because I was putting it into context of our churches to today. But it's
Mhm.
interesting that the kids would have been a part of that and like would have, heard whoever was reading Paul's letter at, their meeting that week out loud. And so I think that if we had our churches modeled a little bit more traditionally like the New Testament churches, it wouldn't seem as daunting to people to step up to be overseers and elders, I don't know. That's a
Mhm.
really long answer for a simple question, but
Yeah. So the note that I took about the New Testament church was
uh-huh.
that the word used in Acts for the word fellowship
Uh-huh.
was, pardon my not knowing Greek, but koinonia,
Uh-huh.
koinonia, or something like that. But it literally meant like fellowship, sharing, mutual participation, unity. Like it was a deep intimacy. And so, like how you were saying, the churches in the early days would have met like every day.
Yeah.
Um, the picture that I kind of created in my head for this was more of like, when they say like it takes a village to raise a kid, it's like it
Mm-hmm.
takes a village to raise a Christian, like
It
just coming
does.
together, doing life together, like meeting at
Mm-hmm.
somebody's house, yeah, for church, but then also like inviting people over for dinner or
Right.
going to set with somebody for a little while or just being present in everybody's lives. I mean, when we go to church nowadays, there's a couple of people we might see multiple times a week, but for the most part, unless you're in the church building, there's a lot of people that you're not going to actually talk to throughout the week. And so
Right.
I think that we've lost the community side
It
of
does.
church that the Acts church represented. And even Jesus in his ministry represented. Like he met with people, like he was with the disciples every day,
Mm-hmm.
but like he met with people all the time and they did life together. And our lives are so busy and so like I have to be here, I have to do this. And then when you do have downtime, you're like, well, I've been so busy, I don't want to really get out or do anything. And so it's taken away from our communities and the
Right.
deepness that we could have with our churches. Um,
I
but
agree.
to kind of go back to what we were talking about with like finding the pastors, um, and you were talking about Christ being the head. I think we have to remember that, like, as believers, we all have a function. I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
the church was ever meant to be somebody preaching to us and everybody else just watching. I
Right.
think that it was supposed to be a conversation. So, like,
Right.
as you're talking about people reading the letters or even Jesus's words or however they did church way back in like the very first people, um yeah, certain people would read things, but I think that people would talk, people would ask questions, they would dig deeper. It would be more of a conversation than it is just sitting there watching somebody read.
Right.
And I think that's where we
Right.
kind of get it wrong too. Our church members shouldn't just be spectators, they should be participants.
Right.
And so then looking for the spiritual gifts that God has given them so that they could participate more. And I'm not saying that somebody who's freshly come into church should step into a leadership
Right.
role, but they do have gifts that could be used.
Right.
And so I think that that's one way to
Right.
utilize your congregation is to make them not spectators.
Right. I think to jump off of that too, I think so often when we hear, oh, you need to use your spiritual gifts and you need to be the hands of Jesus and or like whatever it is that you hear, it's so often followed with why don't you serve in the nursery or you could teach a class or you could do this, like you could be a greeter. You know what I mean? Like not that there's anything wrong with those. I teach children's church and whatever like there's nothing wrong with those things, but I think there's so many great ways to get involved. But I feel like churches, especially the American churches, want you to fit your gift inside of A, B, or C, D box because that's what the church needs. But like not everyone's gifted in the same ways and not everyone's gifted in the ways that would traditionally serve within the American church. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
and I think that sometimes that's hard for people to get involved. I'm not a gifted teacher. That is not my area. I mean, that's my husband's area. He's great at that. That's why he was the pastor and he does most of the talking in children's church. And I am a great helper. I can cut out any shape. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like give me a pair of scissors and some construction paper. We're good to go. But like, that's not my area. But my spiritual gift is discernment, you know? And so, like, where does that fit in within the church? How can I serve the church with that? And I think that the way that we have our churches set up, it makes it a little bit more difficult because it's so structured. Where what I'm looking at the New Testament churches and the early churches wouldn't have been as structured. It would have just been they let the Spirit lead them every meeting, and this is it. No two services looked the same. I mean, they had kids in there and they were in a dining area. Like, there's no room for structure with that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know, just to kind of jump off of what you were saying about that.
Yeah. I had an experience just last week, actually. Our pastor wasn't at church. Him and his family had to leave for the week,
Mm-hmm.
and so we don't have like a backup pastor or like
Yeah.
anybody that we can call in. So we kind of like you said, wing it
Mm-hmm.
whenever that happens. And I I was thinking about it because one of the people in our church will like often make these statements about like you have to be here, like this is like even if our pastor's gone, like you should be here and stuff like that, which is fine. There's a lot of people who do need to hear things like that. But one of the things that frustrates me is when people put the expectation on you that you have to be at church every Sunday. And
Yeah.
if that's
I'm so
the
glad you're hitting on
only
this.
time that you're receiving fellowship or you're learning or like you're being fed, then yes,
Mm-hmm.
you should go to church every Sunday. Like you shouldn't have an excuse to at least do that, like for your
Right.
spiritual life. But like for so many of us, we have so many instances of church outside of church that
Yes.
missing a Sunday isn't going to spiritually hurt us. Like we're
I'm gonna
still
sing
meeting
to
with
you. Yeah.
believers. I mean, I work in a ministry, like we're getting
Right.
lessons and we're having fellowship and we're doing all of these things. And so, like, sometimes putting that pressure on people, like, you have to be here when you're doing church outside. I think that
Right.
that's sometimes where we get things wrong too, is we're
Right.
so zoned in on the American church way that if we went back in time and we saw how they were doing church, a lot of us would probably be too like frustrated and too like this isn't how church is done, like to see like
Right.
the blessings of that.
Right. No, I agree. And I'm glad that you're like mentioning that because I took like a small little section of my notes to hit on that because like I was curious, like, okay, like like, let me rewind. If I miss a Wednesday, if I miss a Sunday, which I do, I like we do miss, like we are not like, we just kind of go with the week as it comes. And we try to be as diligent as we can with that, especially because we do have our kids, like Chris and I might be getting fellowship outside of the church, but I'm not sure other than with Chris and I if they are getting that with, other kids their age. And so I think that that's important with kids is to make sure that we try to have them there. But the way I was raised was like if the doors are open, you're there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday. And now as an adult, if we decide tomorrow night to we record on Tuesdays, if if I decide tomorrow night, Wednesday night to not go to church, I will have like a pit in my stomach all night long. And I have been like recently vocalizing this to Chris and I'm like I feel guilty for not being there and he's like is it conviction or is it like a guilt because of the way that you were raised? And I'm like, I think it's a guilt. Like I'm not sure at this point. Like, but
Yeah.
like it is a guilt, and I beat myself up if I have to miss a Sunday for work or if I have to miss a Wednesday or whatever. Like I beat myself up. And I could be completely wrong, but I think that there's only one scripture, and I think it's in Hebrews, talking about don't neglect to meet together. And not
I think
saying
that's
that
an
you
axe.
is it an Acts? I don't know. My notes could be everywhere. I'm not sure. But regardless, like there is one scripture that says, don't it says, let us consider how we may I wrote it, but I did not write the reference. Let us consider how we may spur on one another towards love and good deeds, not giving up, meeting together like some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And so, as I'm reading that, he says, don't neglect meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. So you do get the idea that you should not be in a habit of not meeting together with other Christians. And this is like referencing church, but I don't think that, like you said, it has to be within the church walls. It can be outside of the church walls. You can have church anywhere. And that's what I have had to just like tell myself, like when I'm beating myself up, like you've been in your word. You've had conversations with your friends about God this week. Like I'm not feeling like I'm depleted of that this week. And that's something that in my like I guess it's legalism for me. Like it's very hard to miss a service. I don't know. That's just
Yeah,
my personal struggle.
I think on the same side of this conversation, just remembering for like you're a parent, you're setting an example for your kids. So like,
Right.
are you teaching your kids that it's okay to put God
Yeah.
aside for whatever you're feeling in the moment? Or
Mm-hmm.
are you going to show up and meet with other believers and like
Right.
do those things? But like I said, like that doesn't have to be in the church. Like,
Right.
yes, that's a great place to go if you're struggling finding a church community outside of the church, because you're gonna go there and you're gonna see a lot
Right.
of like-minded Christians. But at the same time, a lot of times the kids are just like ushered to go play. Like they might get a short lesson and then it's like playtime. But like how much are they really receiving through the week, like learning about Christ?
Right.
And so, like, you're the one who gets to set the example of this is a not negotiable thing. Like, we're going to meet with Christ. And, like, honestly, as Christians, that should be some form every day. Like, every day, there should be some form of fellowship. But if you teach your kids that we only do church on Sundays and Wednesdays, then they're missing out on a really big
Right.
part of Christ.
Right.
And then, like you said, they get the guilt of not being in church
Right.
whenever they don't go. But I don't think that's the message that we want to send them.
Yeah. I think it's about teaching them the heart of the issue and not like the action. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like oftentimes, just like across the board, we'll look at like the action, but we don't look at like the root of it. And I think that that's kind of what you're saying. You got to teach them to want that community and that they need community, but not that in a way that it's gonna make them legalistic. Like I am
Mm-hmm.
about, like I'm trying not to be. It's hard for me, but like I have noticed that. Like I've always like the last few years, I'm like I don't feel like I'm legalistic like I used to be. But like there are a lot of ways that I feel like God is showing me, Danielle, like this is legalism. Like, like
Yeah.
that's what this is. And I'm like, I didn't think that I was that at all. But there
Yeah.
are ways that like God is showing me, like, that's very legalistic of you. And I'm like, it is. It's humbling.
Yeah. I will stick with what I said though. If church is the only time that you're
Right.
getting fellowship, you should be there
You
every
should go.
Sunday, every
I
Wednesday.
agree. Yeah.
But if it's not the only place, then you shouldn't have to feel bad about
Yeah.
not being there.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think I don't know. I guess my question to you, and this is just kind of like off the cuff, is our churches like not being set up the way that they were in the New Testament? Is that a big deal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because you see, so like we all have different gifts, right? So
Right.
like you have the people who evangelize, who bring people into the church.
Hmm.
And so you're getting new members of the church, but then 6 months to a year later, those people are back out of the church.
Right.
And so like your numbers aren't growing. They're just being replaced by new people when the old people leave.
I agree.
And so I think that it does have to do with how we function in the church nowadays. It's a big production, and you're not being discipled. You're being fed because the preacher's up there teaching. But what you do with that is up to you outside of the church. But you're not
Right.
being discipled,
Right.
and I think that leads a lot of people who have been in church their whole lives to be at the same place that they were when they got into the church, and it's become more of a
Right.
habit now. Um, than it is they're growing deeper with their relationship with Christ, and they are working for the kingdom now, and they're doing their spiritual gifts. I think that, like, if you have a spiritual gift to be on, like, to sing, like, you're a really good worshiper, you have this gift, but nobody lets you in the band, are you going to stay at that church?
No.
No, you want to use your spiritual gifts.
Right.
So if you're sitting in the congregation, and every time you have an idea or you have a thought of how something can go, which is the same as an idea, I don't know why I rephrased it, but every time that happens, people will
Yeah.
shut you down because that's just not how we do things here. Are you going to stay?
Yeah.
No. And then let's say you can't find a church that'll utilize your gifts. Well, then what do you do then?
Right. That's kind of like, that's just my thinking, here lately. So it's like I can't think of a single church that is kind of set up like the New Testament churches were. And I'm like, what do we do? Do we like make a push to reform that? Do we utilize, our Wednesday night meetings and our Sunday schools, and really utilize those meeting times, because I would argue that those specific meeting times mirror an actual New Testament church better than like an actual Sunday morning church service.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, do we just utilize those and just continue on? Or like, I don't know, like that's just kind of like my thought is like, this is the thought that I had. I did research. I see where, I'm comparing the two, and so now I'm like, now what? Like I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I don't know.
Well, so I have two thoughts.
Mhm.
First being that, like, yes, our small groups are more like the New
Yeah.
Testament church, but there's so much separation that comes there.
Yes.
And I think a part of being a Christian is younger generations learning from the older generations. And how can you do that if you're not invited to the
Right.
older generation, or the older generation's not willing to come to the youth?
Right.
I know at our church back home, we do like teen invasions where we ask the
Right.
congregation to let our youth come to their house to like meet them, to get to know them. But not
Mhm.
very many people sign up for that, which, I mean,
Right.
having a bunch of youth in your house is intimidating. I get it. But
Right.
they're like, you can do it at our house. Just come meet our youth, you
Yeah.
know? So, like, while small group classes, I think, are more like what we're going for, I think that even in that, there's problems that you would have to fix and address. And then the other issue that I see happening is that, let's say that you do want to make changes. You do want to get your church more to a biblically New Testament foundation. Um, I don't know. Like, one, you have to be in a church with people who are willing to change, willing to grow, willing to do
Yeah.
things that are different, who aren't stuck in their old ways. And so if you're not in a church with people who are willing to do that, do you start your own? And then how
Yeah.
do you go about starting your own? Like, how do you find people to come?
Right.
So I don't know. It's a really hard question,
It
but I
is.
do know that just talking about it is not going to change anything. Like, it's one of
Exactly.
those things that you can talk about it all day long, but unless you actually start having conversations with people within the church to see where they're at, what they would like to do,
Right.
it's not going to change.
Right. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't really have anything else to ask you, because those were my questions I had to ask you, because I'm just like, what do we do? Like, what do we do about it? Like, I don't think that necessarily the way we have church set up is like a deal breaker. Like,
Mm-mm.
oh, these aren't, but also like, I don't feel like we're utilizing the time that we spend there the best way that we can. Like you said, like
Mm-hmm.
we need to mix in those classes. We need the littles to learn with the adults. There needs to be reading of scripture with, the oldest person in the church and the youngest person in the church, together. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, I don't know, like, I don't know, it's daunting to look at it, like, to look at I don't know. I don't know. Chris and I have been in this mind, like just this whirl of thoughts for, since we left ministry. We're like, something ain't right. Something ain't right with how we're doing this. Something ain't right. And, now that like we have been in this study, not just like for this podcast, but like this is something that Chris and I have really just been praying about and trying to figure out like where our beliefs are on this, because I mean, we both come from like very, this is what it is. Like it's this denomination. I mean, my parents weren't necessarily like that, but like that's how Chris was raised, this denomination, these
Mm-hmm.
churches. And now we're just like we don't know. I mean, we have left the denomination. We still attend a church within that denomination, but like we're not any denomination. And that's a whole nother topic, I feel like. Um but now we're just like, where do we go from here? Like we're starting to form our theology about what church should look like and what church should be and what it was established to be and what it was for, a couple hundred years. So now it's like, now what? What do we do with that? So I don't know.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this study though, because this is like something that Chris and I have just been struggling with personally for a while.
Yeah. I don't know how to start a church, but I do know that, um, for instance, whenever I was back home for Christmas, I messaged you and a bunch of other girls,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "Hey, do you guys want to get together while I'm here?" But then I ended up doing like a whole lesson, like with like as a group, we did a whole lesson. And so I think that being intentional with how you even spend time with your friends is a good
Yeah.
start. Like, bring Christ into your relationships and let Him do the work, you know? Like, we still hung
Mm-hmm.
out, we played games, and we did a bunch of crazy stuff, but like,
Yeah.
we still took a moment to go back to Christ and to reflect on our lives with Him, you know? And so I think that, which for instance, that was just girls. But like, even if you have a family that you know that you're like, hey, you guys should come over and have dinner with us. Sit down and read the Bible together for a little bit.
Yeah.
I know this ministry in Philadelphia who their ministry literally started because they were doing a Bible study in their living room and people just kept inviting people to the Bible study in their living room. So it's not that it's impossible to find
Right.
people, it's just taking the time to start, I guess. Instead of just thinking about it, talking about it, like putting in active steps. Invite somebody over for dinner, talk about Jesus. Um, Before I ever moved out here the first time, me and two other girls back home, we met together for a Bible study every week, which then they started having kids and that got difficult. So we ended up stopping because we used to
Right.
do it online too so that we could keep going. But
Yeah.
like, even doing that, but invite the husbands and the other kids, you know, like just
Mm-hmm.
open up your house, I guess, and
Yeah.
keep Jesus somewhere in there.
Right. Yeah, I mean that is like the logical way, but like I'm just gonna throw this out there. I have become such a hermit in my house. Like I
Mm-hmm.
love my holler, I love my house. It's hard for me to get out and like do anything, honestly. Like, I mean, I do go and do stuff, I didn't get to meet with you guys when you were here for Christmas, and I was so sad that I had to miss that. But, I love it when you're home and like we went to that women's worship night that one night. Like that was so much fun. But
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know if it's anxiety or what, but like my home is my safe place. And I think a lot of people feel like that the world, like, I mean, whether it's social media, the news right now, just like the American political climate, the church climate right now, is just everything just feels so tense. I think people like their safe place is their home. And I think that's another way that like Satan is attacking the church and
Mm-hmm.
Christians on an individual level, is it's just so much out there that we don't want anybody or anything in here with us when we are here, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that I feel like that and then I get convicted of it all the time. I'm
Because
like,
Jesus tells us not to fear.
Yes, but like just not the fear, but just like the mental exhaustion
Yeah.
that I feel sometimes when I'm out peopling, you know? And
Yeah.
then I come home and I'm like, I just want to turn my phone off. I don't want to talk to anybody. And I'm like, that's, I mean, that's what Satan loves to do is like, seclude
Isolate.
us. And then you're comfortable in that seclusion, you know? And it's like, that's the opposite of where we're supposed to be. And it's, I don't know. I struggle with
Yeah.
that. This is
Well,
stepping
and
all
I
over my
think it's
toes.
reframing your mentality. So you said, "This is my home. I love
Yeah,
my holler."
yeah,
Instead of being like, "This is God's home." Like God
yeah.
blessed me with this home. He blessed me with this holler.
Right,
Like
right.
it's supposed to be used for His purpose. And I
Yeah, I
think
mean, you're
that's,
right.
and I'm using you as an example because you said it,
No,
but like
you're right though.
all of us, it's
Right,
mine, this is mine, this is what I
right.
do. And instead, we need to reframe our thinking to, no, this is God's. Like, He's given it
Yeah,
to me to utilize for His kingdom. And I
right,
think that's also when you go back to the New Testament, they would sell their possessions for people. Like, nothing was just theirs,
right,
it was a community thing. And so I
right.
think a lot of it has to do with restructuring how we think about the things that God has given us.
No, I agree. I agree completely. I knew that this whole topic was going to step all over my toes. Like, I was excited for it, but then, like, when it came to the action part, I knew I was going to feel pretty convicted of it because, like that's just where Chris and I are right now. But, you're right. Like, this is God's home. Like, we dedicated this home to God. Like, when we moved in, like, we anointed the windows and the doors and we dedicate Chris and I went through with our kids and we prayed over our home together as a family and we said like God like this is yours and why we're all here as a family like use us and use this home for like your will and then look at me I'm hiding away in here because the world exhausts me
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so
It's
yeah
always funny
I agree
to go back to like the word you exhaust that you use. But the idea of having to get out and go do things, I'm just like, no, I don't want to. But then whenever I
yes
do it, I'm like, I can't believe that I
always feel
ever didn't
better
want to do this. Like, this is what I needed. And I
right
think that that's the anxiety that Satan uses to be like, just don't go, just don't do it. Whereas
yes
in reality, God's like, you need this. You need to go. You might not feel
right
like you want to go, but don't rely on your feelings.
right
Because the Bible tells us time and time again that our feelings are
right
fleeting and they're not trustworthy. And so, yeah, it is exhausting to do life, but
yeah
it's definitely worth it with people who love Christ just as much as you do. And I don't know, like when I think about things, even out here, like whenever I see land or something, and I'm like, there's just so much that we could do if we only owned like
mhm
land or something. And so then it's like, well, God's given you what He already has. What are you doing with that? Like, why are
mhm
you looking for other things to fulfill what God wants you to do when you already have what you need?
right dang it Lexi
So Danny's going to be having a holler pot party for anybody who wants to go.
a holler Bible study.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hilarious. And then afterwards, everyone's gonna help us finish the kids' play set. No, I'm just kidding. Bring your Bibles and your drills.
But see, that's community. Like,
right?
that's the church showing up for each other. I think, like, it really does take a village
hmm
in this walk with Christ because we should be able to just call somebody, hey, can you come help me do this? I need help. Or, like, even when we ask each other for prayers, but, like, we don't actively, we're not actively in each other's lives, so we don't really know what's going on until somebody's like, hey, I
Right,
need prayer for this. Instead of being like, oh, like, I knew that you were struggling with something. I was just waiting for you to
right,
share with me. Like,
right,
even you, I messaged you about needing prayers out here, but you already knew how things are out here. So it wasn't like a shock for you to be
right,
like, okay, like, yeah, that's something specific I can pray for. Like, you've been a part
right.
of my life enough to know that I definitely need prayers out here.
You are
But
in
I
my
gave you
prayer journal,
something
girly.
specific to pray for.
Yeah, Yeah.
Mm.
No, I agree. I think it's just a community aspect. And like, if we were doing church, like, we should be doing church, like the New Testament believers did church, then, like you said, we wouldn't have to, even with the asking of prayer, because people would just already know, like your situation, like when I reached out to you and I had already been praying about that situation, but I didn't know that there was a development in that situation. So,
Mm.
like, now specifically, I'm praying very specifically. You know what I mean? Like very intently. But it's like there's so many people like and I'm just looking at faces, like that I go to church with. I don't know what's going on in their lives, and they don't know what's going on in mine, and I think also part of that is like people within the church not being good brothers and sisters. And I've been, I'm just as guilty of this as, other people. But it's like, you request prayer in Sunday school or you're talking to so and so, man, I really need prayer in this area. Like I'm struggling or like this is like not going well or, I have this opportunity, whatever the prayer is or like whatever the need is, you're going to be the conversation at somebody's dinner table that night. And
Mm.
so I think that also like that has created walls within that community too, because like you just, at least for me, and the things that we have gone through at, the various churches, like I struggle trusting people. Like there I could probably count on both hands the people in my life that like I trust, like I struggle with it. And that's not how it was supposed to be at all. Like I don't see
Yeah.
that in the New Testament.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, when I picture it, it's like you want to run to somebody for prayer because you know that they are going to fight with you.
Right.
Not a, I'm just hoping that you'll pray for me.
Uh-huh.
But like I know that you'll pray for me. It's
Yeah.
just it's vastly different, and I think that
Yes.
we've lost the community, which
Yeah.
is very sad.
While we're on the topic of prayer and like saying that like we're gonna pray for people and stuff, like this was like years ago and I think I've shared this on here before. Like I was so guilty of being like, oh, I'm gonna pray about that for you, but like I wouldn't stop immediately and pray. And it wasn't that I intentionally didn't do it. I just would say, I'm gonna pray for you, and then I would get busy and forget about it. And I was like reading one day and they were like, when you tell someone you're gonna pray for them, you're telling them that you are going to take them to the feet of the creator of the universe. You're going to lay their problems down at the feet of God on their behalf. And you lie about it? Like, what? Like,
Yeah.
that is wild. Like, and ever since I read that, if I tell someone I'm going to pray for them, it like I have to do it immediately, like in my head, and I will try to make like a mental note to continue, but like I'm gonna do it like within the few minutes following, or like because I'm like I don't want to be guilty of that. Like that when you think about it like that, I'm like that's such a promise to make to somebody, and how flippantly we just like throw it around. I don't know. Like I don't know. Anytime
We
prayer
really
comes up,
do.
I'm like I'm gonna throw that in there because that just like wrecked my world one day, like when I was reading it. And I'm like, anytime I can like make that statement, I do. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. There was
But
something that I wanted to say, and I don't remember what it was.
oh no.
So maybe it wasn't meant to be said. But I think that as we go through this topic, a lot of the hurt that we see, um, not from like the outside world, but the church hurt that we see, I think, because you've talked about this earlier, I think that it would be vastly different if church was done in a community
Mm-hmm.
way. Like being there for each other, like looking out for each other, making sure that things are okay, making sure that
Right.
there's multiple pastors so that they're not leading you astray. It's easier to see the sheep in wolf's clothing when there's a lot of
Right.
sheep doing the job that they're supposed to do. And
Right.
I think that we even get examples in the Bible whenever they set up committees or whenever they delegated. Like it wasn't one person who was doing
Mm-hmm.
those things. I think that instead of looking at it as a hierarchy, like, yes, there's leadership in church,
Yeah.
but let's look at it more of a we are the body of this church. And if this body doesn't function correctly, then this church isn't going to function correctly.
Right.
And also like maybe being okay with things not being structured so
That's what I
well.
was about to say. Yes.
And how many pastors, oh, that's what I was going to say. How many pastors get up and talk about food and how much we love food and how we're always having meals and stuff? So have meals during your service. Like sit around a
Yeah.
table with each other instead of being in the sanctuary. Like go to the
Right.
kitchen and do
I was about to
church, you know?
say, you can't take that food into the sanctuary because you might get it on the carpet. So,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah.
So don't go in the sanctuary.
I was being very sarcastic.
Yeah, I know.
There's
But
like
like,
sign no food or drink here. I come with my coffee. I'm like,
yeah,
sorry.
I don't know. I think that there would be less church hurt if the church functioned better. And I think that there would be more people willing to seek out God at church. Um, if they see how the church treats each other, they're going to want to be a part of that.
Right.
And they're going to want to come when they're broken instead of being like, no, they're just judgmental. They just talk about us. I've heard them talk about their congregants all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Those are just my takeaways with church. But like
Yeah.
I said, right now it's just a conversation and like things aren't
Right.
actively being done to change it. But I think that if you're if you stuck around this long in the podcast, like if you agree, then like maybe start having conversations. Like go
Yeah.
to somebody and talk or like start your own Bible study and just invite people to your house. Just open up your homes.
Right. I think for me, all of that, and then I want to add, don't be hard on your pastors because he's literally doing the job of what like five or six are supposed to do. Like you have one pastor shouldering the load that was meant for 5 to 6 men, like, or more or less, depending, whatever, but multiple, we'll just say multiple men, so like don't be so hard on them. Give them a break because I've been there, Chris has been there, and it's hard. And I see why it was hard. And I see why we have burnout. And just give your pastor some grace. Grace and grace. The other day, Graham, we were having a little bit of a difficult day. And I asked him, I said, what are you thankful for today? We were at the dinner table, and he was like, grace upon grace. I was like, yes, sir. Grace upon grace.
Mm-hmm. It's needed.
It is. He needed it that day. It was so
Yeah.
funny. Grace upon grace.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that was a good little conversation about
No,
church
I enjoyed
function
it.
and just things that are happening. I know that we've talked about church a lot and how we see things, but I think that this was different enough that it wasn't so like repetitive
Repetitive, yeah.
for people who watch us.
Yeah, and if you guys have like any insight into like what I was talking about, like what we talked about earlier in the podcast about like the transition from like multiple overseers to like the singular one, and like when we started seeing like the Catholic Church emerge and things like that, like if you guys have any more like resources or info that you guys want to add to that, like I'm all about learning, like reading about that era of time, so please
Same.
drop them in the comments. I want to
We're
know.
nerds. Just give
We
us
are.
the resources. Tell us the
Right.
fun facts.
But yeah, but thank you guys for joining us. I think this was a great episode to kick off season 5. So,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
season 5, we're here, we're back, ready to roll, ready for a new year. We're so excited that you guys are checking along with us. And if you're new here, we're so excited that you stuck around this long, and we hope that you enjoy our other podcast. We will see you guys later.
Bye.